Welcome, everyone, and happy Thursday. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat, where we are going to be talking about mental health, athletes, and sports. This is going to be an incredible conversation. And today I have the honor and privilege of interviewing Dr. Marlene Holmes, who is going to be talking to us about her expertise. Before we get started, I want you to do me a favor and share this message out. Go ahead and share it to your networks and your colleagues, your friends and your families. If you are a person that enjoys sports, or if you are a parent or an athlete yourself, please, we want to make sure you get the information. We're going to be talking about some very crucial and critical things around the journey of an athlete and what happens behind the scenes, the mental health sort of aspects that are typically not seen. And so we want to make sure we get this message out. So go ahead and share it out. Also, do us a favor and go ahead and follow us at iRaise.org on all social media platforms, whether LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are our link is iRaise.org. And then if you're interested in our services, please visit us at www.iraiseinc.org. Dr. Marlene, I'm so happy to have you. We only talked for a few seconds before we went live, but I am so excited to talk with you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to connect with your audience and share some knowledge and hopefully impact a lot of folks. So thank you.
Absolutely. So let's jump into it. I'm going to read a little bit about Dr. Marlene's bio, and we'll jump into our first questions on mental health. Dr. Marlene Holmes, based in Dallas, Texas, is a dedicated professional with extensive experience in healthcare administration, addiction therapy, academia, and K 12 college readiness programs. She is a seasoned director and therapist and a respected professor, a trusted guide for individuals navigating life's challenges. She has a unique perspective as an HBCU graduate, where she specializes in supporting Black women and athletes through college sports transitions. Her versatile services, including workshops and keynote speaking, have been recognized by prestigious universities, media outlets, and sport organizations. Dr. Holmes passionately empowers individuals to unlock their potential and chart a course towards a brighter future. That's so incredible. Dr. Holmes, I know we have a script, but I really want to hear what got you into this work. You are so experienced and very rounded in terms of mental health, but also you have the K to 12 and then the college level. You're in so many realms, and I just wanted to know like what got you started into this work.
Wow. Well, I have to be honest, first and foremost, it's a plan that was designed and ordained by God. This was not necessarily something that I've strategically planned. I think it would be almost impossible to really structure and all the caveats and movement that has happened in my career. So to answer your question, I'll go back to college. I was a collegiate athlete myself. I entered the world of organized sports around in sixth, seventh grade. And so from, 11, 12, all the way until turning 21, I was an athlete. But prior to that, played outside, ran outside, anywhere I could figure out a sport or some type of physical activity, that was me. I also come from a military family. So I was very exposed to different cultures, religions, opportunities, professions,
Sure.
and those seeds were planted very early on. I had an amazing academic advisor who introduced me to the world of social work because the only aspect of social work that I knew was what most people think, right? You're working in healthcare or you're
Right.
working with child protective services in some
Sure.
aspect, or you have your own practice. I was not really interested in either of those, but sometimes when you are an athlete and you're on scholarship, which I was, you are kind of limited at times based on trying to graduate, trying to keep your grades up. But she was just convinced that this would be a field that I could flourish in. So she was right. Got my master's at UCF. As you mentioned, I did graduate from Bethune-Cookman University, which is HBCU. And I had those challenges from transitioning from undergrad to graduate school, but I didn't know what I was feeling, what I was thinking. I just thought this was a typical path of a young adult trying to figure out their career and life goes on. Fast forward to working in healthcare after grad school. that is where little seeds of awareness were discovered by me. So I
Sure.
worked in a behavioral health facility where I was able to oversee residential care. So behavioral health will be treatment, for those of you that don't know, with mental health, with addiction. Being at South Florida at the time, most of my youth that were in my long-term programs, unfortunately, were involved in human trafficking, were addicted to drugs. And these were youth anywhere you are from 7 years old to
Mm,
17 years old.
sure.
And a lot of times to have conversation or to find their interest, it was often around sports. So
Mm,
again, not knowing the leverage that I had as an athlete, but understanding that developing programs around physical activity, introducing them to sports, finding their hobbies and positive habits were skills and conversations that allowed me to really learn and know more about the children, but also for them to see me less as a professional administrator, but
sure.
as someone who truly cared about their well-being. Um, so I eventually left healthcare and got into the college readiness space of K through 12, where I worked as a regional director for a very affluent tutoring company. And
Mm,
so that's where I learned the leverage of being an athlete, because I'm sitting in these spaces working with parents and their children. So I'm having some therapeutic skills that I'm using in these
sure.
spaces, family therapy, individual, and then being able to talk about that athlete journey of what it's like to get scholarships, what you're having to submit for film, but also seeing that mental health component. I can see when a child was struggling with anxiety, but the parent didn't recognize that.
Mm,
I could see some signs or concerns of depression, but maybe the parent saw it as being lazy or not being committed. So with so many different areas that I said, there's a lot that needs to be understood, and I started to recognize myself in these youth. So decided to go back, earn my PhD, and really dig deep into the mental health aspect, learn more about that transition, and realizing that it wasn't just a process I went through or my teammates went through. This has been a topic that has been discussed, but not often heard for
mhm.
Black women, Black men, and all athletes in these spaces. So that's the short version of how I got in this area. But it was really an experience on every job I've ever had that
Yeah.
somehow sport has come up, and sometimes somehow mental health has been an aspect where I'm like, yeah, we're missing some pieces that I need to help connect.
I just thank you for that. I think it's an incredible journey, and I think you said it best that it's a journey ordained by God. How you got into this space, it was a collective of all of your experiences and passion, starting from being an athlete yourself at a very young age. And I'm really curious, as a mom of a middle schooler that loves basketball, that's a basketball player, if you can talk a little bit about the what it's like to be a athlete as a child and to matriculate through those experiences in high school and even in college.
Absolutely. So there's actually a theory that a lot of my research is based in. It's really the bulk and the foundation of my dissertation. It's called Black Racial Identity Development. And it's something that the community as a whole, we all experience, but it's not necessarily a linear process for everyone, right? We have our own life experiences, the communities we're raised, and the different parents we're raised by. So there's so many facets of that. But one of the first stages of this model is called the pre-encounter stage. And so this is usually when you first become an athlete or when you're first introduced to sports. So that could be watching sports with your parents, having an older sibling, and maybe you're going to the game, or you literally are just introduced to a sport in gym class and now you become interested. So there's so many different layers to that. And so what the research tells us is that it can vary anywhere between 3 years old and 7 years old. In my research, I have some participants that have actually shared that they felt like they were exposed to the sport before they were even born. Like they didn't have a choice but to be an athlete, but to be successful, to make it to a Division 1
Incredible.
program. And so what that looks like for someone typically coming into the sport is that it's fun. It's something to do with recreation. It's another outlet. It's a way to develop that peer support system. You have all of that. Where we see the shift happen is where the positive reinforcement, the support, the celebration
Sure.
is now starting to attach to their identity. So at that early age, we haven't quite separated being a student, being a older sibling, a middle child, being an athlete, being a friend. We don't have the skill set yet to really structure our identities. But
Sure.
whatever gets the most attention, whatever is the most fun, typically becomes our priority. And that
Mhm.
is the early stages of what it typically can be for athletes coming into the space. Now, as you, like you said, matriculate to that journey, it's going to depend on your environment. It's going to
Mhm.
depend on your school. It's going to depend on if you are only playing in school versus travel clubs. There's so many different areas. But what we find is that if you come from a family dynamic of former athletes, let's say your parent or parents play sports, there can be some type of pressure to be successful. This is how you do
Yeah.
it. Or if you didn't perform well in that game, on the ride home, we're talking about what you should have done better, what you could have done better. I don't know how you missed that. You've been doing this for the last 2 months, right? But you just started the
Right.
sport. So we see that energy, that emotional development, the lack thereof, start at that early stage.
Mhm.
And so that could be one path of what that looks like. And we see the challenges. Another area of that is the communication. We often see that becomes very challenging for athletes, meaning that coaches are very similar to our parents. So if you come from a household where children are seen and not heard, and then you take that same approach in the sports space,
Yeah.
young children can usually struggle with the ability to communicate, to advocate for themselves, to say,
Mhm.
well, I don't want to play today because my ankles is still a little sore, or, I can't really balance the sport and my education to study.
It's a huge one.
It's hard. How do I know how to communicate when I need help? So we look at so many different areas, and so this stage continues to follow the youth until they get through all their stages, through high school, through college,
Yeah.
and what we see at that far component after leaving college sports or high school, or you're forced out of the sport based on injury. Now that band-aid or that bubble or the veil of protections, the research says, of being an athlete is now snatched away, and
Mm.
you are forced to step into this world in a sense of being naked because you haven't
Wow.
really had an opportunity to explore who you are as a young woman, as a young man, as a minority, because so many things in your life have not mattered except for who you are in the spotlight as an athlete. And I want
Mm.
to add that doesn't matter if you are the star athlete on the team
Mhm.
or if you've been riding the bench. You've still been in that space of being
Mhm.
an athlete, and it's totally different from those that don't compete in sports.
I appreciate you bringing that up because my next question was actually going to be about the star athletes. And throw in, I know we're like middle of playoff. It's a big season right now
Mhm.
and basketball. And we just, your team Dallas, like we talked about, won last night, although I was going for Minnesota. But I think, and then like the star athlete, right? So you got like Anthony Edwards, Carrie, right?
Mhm.
These are the star athletes on the team. And then also, thinking about those that are considered star athletes on their team, whether it be basketball, football, or whatever sport they're playing. What type of pressure or mental challenges might they be dealing with, whether in the game or outside of the game, that you've noticed in your research?
Absolutely. Well, I think pressure is the biggest thing. When you are maybe the captain of the team or the star of the team, how that team moves as far as wins, losses, in a sense, you will feel, and sometimes the coaches put it on your back, that you carry this team. You're responsible for the success. You're responsible for your team being responsible. And anytime things are just go slightly awry, then now we have some concerns on maybe I've dropped the ball. How can I improve? This is my fault. So there's a lot of studies done by the NCAA that talk about in the college level that some of the highest sports of anxiety and depression are track and field runners. You also have it in cross country. A lot of individual sports, if you think about it, it makes sense. The physical strain and training that you need, that's solely on you. But then when we look at team sports like football, basketball, soccer, and things of that nature, we tend to see higher rates of suicidal ideations, and even, unfortunately, those that have lost their lives to suicide. And so it's usually an internal pressure that the skill set has not been established on how to communicate, when to communicate, and if you should
Mhm.
communicate.
Sure.
So the pressure of if we're talking about, high school, college in that area, not
Mhm.
the pro space, is balancing your academics and your sport. You as an athlete, you're typically trained to not show any flaws. So if you're struggling in the class, how do you communicate that? If you are struggling in the class, sometimes that will roll over to performance anxiety and start to also impact your game. But you don't necessarily know that as the player, just something is off, you can't figure it out. And how do you tell someone what's going on, right?
Mm.
And if you don't know how to communicate that, if there hasn't been an opportunity or space for you to do so, you are internalizing that as you're a failure, as you're not good enough, because that sport is what gives you your label of popular, of acceptable, of, even in some spaces where in fact that you are tolerated. And we're talking about the spaces where you are on a predominantly white campus, whether you're in high school, elementary, college, and it doesn't reflect what you're used to. That maybe you're in some of these spaces simply because of your talent. So if your talent is to fail or to waver, what does that do for the acceptance and the relationships around you? So there's pressure in the athletic space, there's pressure in the social space, there's pressure in the academic space. And all of that is taken to the next chapter when you get in the professional world. How do you communicate with your supervisor? How do you ask for help? Especially when you only see the world in wins and losses and no gray area. If you
Wow.
don't succeed, if you don't get the job, if you're not able to
Mm.
get an interview, you truly internalize and go back and regress to what you've been in the past. And so
Mhm.
that's where we see a lot of those hospitalizations. And I can't tell you how many young adults that I've admitted into behavioral health facilities that have been athletes that are just disappointed in not being able to find that high of the child cheering, of the crowd cheering, of the coach
Yeah.
giving the high five, of putting on
Mhm.
that jersey, and not having that anymore. That's really where the challenges are, because we are not having these honest conversations, and
Mhm.
feeding and educating these children
Yeah.
before they get to high school, before they get to college.
Mm. Oh, Dr. Holmes, that was really profound. And thinking about what that feels like. It's almost like it's a high, it's a feeding of endorphins, right?
Yes,
That pleasure sensor being stimulated in the brain when you're when you're hearing the crowd cheering and you're sort of lifted from that. And that's your sense of happiness, your source of joy.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
and also even there's been a lot of research around even the team sports and when they give each other high fives or the amount of
Mhm.
touches that
Yes,
happen just on the court or in the field that it actually helps to increase happiness
mhm,
and unity amongst team members.
yes,
And so having to break away from that or losing that without having some strategies to sort of replace what those I guess what those things have done for you. You
absolutely.
can imagine what type of challenges that
Mhm, mhm.
athletes will be facing.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just so much, and in a sense, sometimes it can create a false sense of reality,
Sure.
that you go into. And I'll say, even for myself, going from sport to being an administrator, I was used to teamwork and everyone knowing their role and everyone being accountable for whatever their role is on that team.
Yeah.
And then you get into the professional sector and you're like, oh, you don't, no teamwork, no communication, no plan, no public acknowledgement of success, or thank you for helping me, or
Mm.
thanks for that meeting we had, before yesterday's meeting. It
Mhm.
was, in a sense, a dog eat dog world, and I wasn't used to that. And
Sure.
also, we have to be mindful that mentorship is so valuable. And I encourage so many parents of young athletes to make sure that you have a create an environment and support system outside of sports. They should
Mhm.
be involved in other clubs and other organizations beyond the sport, because
Sure.
you want, just like we train and we do off-season training, we watch how we eat, we do all of that to build the best athlete possible. We should be doing the same for our identity outside of the sport, who we are as people, who we are as young women, young men. We should be feeding that just as well, so that we remain balanced our entire life, that we understand we encompass all these intersections of our identity, and we're not just one thing.
No, I love that. And And that's great because I think sometimes you could also, as an athlete, sort of be role casted to just one
Mhm.
identity, or just this is
Mhm.
all you are, this is all there is to you, when there actually might be other things that you're called to do outside
Absolutely.
of sports that you may never actually venture into. So I love the idea of encouraging your kids to do other things outside of just sports, whether that be clubs or mentorship or music or other things. But what else are you passionate about? There's more to you than just that, and I love that you talked about that. Um, so Dr. Holmes, I know you're also in the space of K to 12 and
Mhm.
helping with college readiness. I'm wondering if you can speak to your experience around what it's been like and
Mhm.
getting kids ready for college in that space,
Yes.
um, particularly Black and Brown children. What are some challenges you're noticing or that you've noticed in your work and helping that K to 12 become college ready?
Absolutely. One thing that I have noticed is a lot of the motivation that the youth have to pursue and further their education outside, even in, I'm talking about fifth graders, sixth graders, is really secondary trauma from their parents.
Mm,
So I remind parents a lot to be mindful of the conversations that you're having about hardships in your life. I'm not saying don't be honest, but sometimes, even though the child may not understand everything, they
mm,
feel the emotions. So
mm,
for them, if there's hardships, if they're wanting certain things and you can't afford them, just watching how we verbalize it and how we respond to it,
right.
because the children at a very young age are now saying, well, when I get older, I'm going to make sure I get that. When I get a job, I'm going to make sure I get that. And that's great, but it's coming out of desperation instead of truly just saying, I'm going to
Mm,
pursue. I have some goals and some dreams, and my parents are doing great, and I want to do great. It's coming out of panic, and it's creating anxiety in a lot of the young adults and young children. I say young adults, but young children that I've worked with in the past, and that I continue
yeah.
to work with. And it's not intentional. And I want to remind parents that it's not, you're doing the best you can. There's no playbook, but these are the conversations that the children are having with the tutors and myself when the parents are not around.
Mhm.
um, we find that we have to remember that depression looks different for everyone. You can,
Mhm.
as you can be smiling and going to work every day and be struggling with depression at home. And so with our youth, we're seeing that, okay, yes, I'm participating in the sport, yes, I have straight A's, but that's it. I'm going through the motions. This is the way of life, but no one's checking in and saying, "How was your day? Let's do this.
Mhm.
Let's try this." You're A lot of our children are really developing the habit of being a machine, and
Mm.
that's often how athletes are described, right? When we leave the sport and we are asked, "What did it feel like?" We're like, "Well, it was just kind of being like a robot, a machine. You just had something, and it became a program, and that's what you do every single day. That's what you expect." And so, with college readiness, I have to be very honest and realistic. As you and I are speaking today, that's how I talk to parents, other business leaders when I come to the space and I talk about mental health. I have to be honest and say, we have to realize that one, every the child may not be able to be raised the same way you are or you were.
That's right.
What worked for you may not work for this child.
That's
Um,
right.
and so you have to have that honest conversation with yourself that, okay, well, how can I find other skills and attributes to successfully align with what my child's needs are? And that's a big part of what I've seen as well. But when we're talking about like that mental health journey and college readiness, a lot of it is just being realistic. If your child has a 2.1 GPA, and we're talking about Duke Medical School, we need to have some honest conversations. And so,
Right. Right.
unfortunately, that has been a big area for me, is to say and use my story. I went to a junior college out of high school, right? And then I transferred to a HBCU, which was a Division 1, which is ultimately a goal. But a
Mhm.
lot of times, parents, they hear junior college or community college, and it doesn't have as much reverence or power as that word
Right.
university. And so I like to just educate parents and say, um, I've never been asked when I've went for an interview or a job where my degree was from. It's just that I have
Okay.
a degree,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I give my story. It wasn't that I wasn't smart enough or couldn't, have that grade. But I went through a lot in high school. My parents were getting divorced. I'm the oldest. So all of that pressure to have. So I went from a 3.8, 3.7 GPA to a 2.7 GPA because life and social factors were just ultimately distracting. But I had no idea how that would impact my ability to find a school to play a sport because that never changed. I still wanted to compete in sports, but no one told me how that would alter my eligibility, with scoring, AC, SAT, all of that. So sometimes we have to make sure that even as a parent, if we don't know that path, we try to connect our children to those resources so they can still have an opportunity and chance and be honest about the dynamics in the family that is happening. I'm a huge advocate of therapy. There are a lot of resources, a lot of groups that children can be a part of, because life isn't easy for anyone. And when those shifts happen, their sport becomes their comfort zone.
Mhm.
But often we are missing some of those valuable emotional components that we need to address because once things change or they're injured and they can't play, now all of this becomes a reality and we sometimes don't give them a fighting chance.
So good, Dr. Holmes. It's something that came to me when I was hearing you talk about um, the children you work with and some of the things they tell you when their parents are not there. And then also just I think the pressure we put on our kids. And one of the things that I thought about was I think sometimes our kids that are very high performing children, that we got to check on those children. You
Yes.
talked about not checking on them and just okay, you're getting A's, okay, you're playing sports, you're doing what you're supposed to do in that area, but how are you doing mentally? How are you emotionally? How are you, right? Just doing an actual check-in and not just once, but that being a consistency. So a part of our culture as parents is that we're checking on, especially our strong kids
Yeah.
or kids that are high performing.
Yeah.
And I think there is a tendency as parents to either not pay attention to that part. Maybe it's a lack of knowing how to do it, or just not having the awareness.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that as parents we're checking on our kids' mental health and that we're
Absolutely.
asking those questions. Not just the kids that we know they need that check-in because
Mhm.
they're obviously either they're typically in trouble or something going on,
Right.
but even our kids that are performing high, that we gotta be able to check in on them and see how they're doing.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that everyone and all of your listeners do something that I talk about a lot, personal inventory. Just kind of checking in with yourself, creating that list of, stressors in your own life, challenges in your own life, successes, goals that you have for yourself. And I feel that if you're able to be connected and do that with yourself, and then you're having children, or you work with children, or you are a coach or a mentor, if you're able to do that for yourself, then your language, your thought patterns will also adjust so that you're able to create and invite others into those spaces as well. I think that's often what we're missing. As parents, we have many parents. I grew up in a 2-parent household, but both parents were working, right? So they're dealing with their day. The biggest thing was just making sure I got my homework done. But did my mother have time every night to check my homework? No. And did she feel a need to? Probably not, because I was doing very well with my grades and my GPA in school. And so if you're doing well early on, and then you get to high school, and now my mother had her own stressors with, going through a divorce and things of that nature. So because there wasn't necessarily a need or visually she couldn't see a concern, it's not that she didn't care. It's just I didn't know how to communicate that I needed help because I had always been that high performer, right? Whether it was sport or it was in
Sure.
school. So I think we have to start working on ourselves first in order to help others. I mean, we know as social workers in the world of therapy, we talk about make sure your cup is full before you pour into others.
Great.
And this truly is the thing, no matter what area that you're working in, to make sure that we're connected in that space. But yeah, that personal inventory allows us to kind of look at our emotional development. It kind of allows us to look at our journey of development and where we are and where we're going. And allows you to really see the world in a clear lens and not so much a tainted lens based on your positive experiences or your own trauma. And I think that's been a big area that I've been able to improve, even for myself, because I'm going to naturally see things a certain way because of my own bias. with coming from the world of sports. But doing the research, I had to make sure that I'm continuously able to pull myself out of that to hear these organic experiences, so that when I go into these spaces to educate or to support or to facilitate these workshops, I'm able to show up to the needs of what others need, because I've done the work myself for myself.
I love that. I love that so much, Dr. Holmes.
Thank you.
Just reiterating as we're coming to a close that in order for us to really help our children and help anybody else, we have to first be able to help ourselves, which you think about when you're flying on a plane and you have to go through the same safety precautions before
Yep.
you take off. It's always stated that before you can help anyone else with their own mask, you have to pull your own down and be able to breathe and help you first.
Yes.
And I think that is the really the is what we want to leave with everyone. Is we want everyone to be healthy and well and balanced, and we want our kids and our families and our clients and our families that we work with to be well and healthy and balanced. But are we? And are we checking in with ourselves, right? Like Dr. Holmes talked about, doing that personal inventory. I like to call it emotional audit. That
Mhm.
I like to do, especially when I feel like I'm being triggered.
Mhm.
I go through an emotional audit, and I know I gotta find my balance and
Mhm.
regulate myself, and I'm like, "I'm being triggered, gotta regulate, right? What's my coping strategies?" And I say this to everyone, like, make self-care accessible, right? Doesn't
Yeah.
have to always be like the spa or, a vacation, even though those things are good. It could be a nice bath, it could
Yeah.
be a book, it
Yeah.
could be, "I'm hungry, let me eat," right? It
Right.
could be, "I'm thirsty, I need some water."
Yeah.
Right? Self-care is you're caring for you. You're not neglecting you. And I think that's, what we see a lot is as adults, as parents, as social workers, we neglect
Mhm.
ourselves.
Yes.
And we there's impossible to really pour into other people and impart and help others if we're empty ourselves. And
Right.
so I wanted to highlight that what you said, but I like for you to have the last words around on this, Dr. Holmes. And if you can talk about some concrete things that we can do as parents, as whether we're social workers, therapists, or parents, or athletes,
Yeah.
just some concrete strategies or practices so that we can be well.
Absolutely. Regardless of if you are in the world of athletics, in any aspect, I just think a healthy way of functioning in life that is a skill that's transferable no matter what arena you're in, so to speak, is just, again, that development of you at your core. What truly makes you happy that isn't necessarily reliable on a person, place, or thing. You have to be able to find that and it be rooted in who you are, because then it takes away the ability for experiences to happen to take that away from you. So often our jobs become our identity, our grades become our identity, the clothes we wear become our identity.
Mhm.
And there's social media and all that we see on there. So many things in society now that impacts us, but we have to somehow get to the core of what is something that we can hold on to, that we're proud of, that we've created within ourselves that no one else can take. I think that's one of the biggest components. And that's something that is a lifelong journey, right? Life changes, life evolves, people you're around changes. So I think that's something to really think about. And that can just come sometimes with just your own thoughts and walking outside. We try to say some of the things are cliche, but honestly, they're the most impactful when you have that moment with yourself. And so I've seen a lot of schools and a lot of communities start to incorporate things like quiet time, whether it's meditation or breathing exercises that they're starting to do with kids that are very, very young. And you're seeing the skill and the difference and how they're able to navigate the rest of their days. So whatever that looks like, it doesn't have to necessarily be that, but we have to start working on development of self and self-awareness at a very young age. So again, it just boils down to communication. And it also goes down to interaction. You talked about the power of connection. There's a lot of studies out there that talk about the impact of having a hug a day. Now, I don't always advocate hugs because we're in different spaces, but it's
Mhm.
simply saying that the connection with others is so valuable.
Mhm,
especially if you have children that are they're the only child, or you
mhm,
have children that are maybe in a single parent home.
mhm,
There are a lot of free activities, you all, that the libraries put on, that maybe the schools may have,
mhm.
that local youth centers are having. Summer's coming up. So
Absolutely,
I say, try to find, I'm an advocate, find the free stuff, because that's how you find
absolutely.
amazing connections, people, and things that build off of it. And they're accessible to anyone. So once you're able to go in those spaces, I think that is the foundation of everything that I say, because by the time most of my clients are in high school and college, and so it's going to take a lot of work to go back and do that self work to get to
Absolutely.
where they need to be now, versus it being a steady process their entire life. So no one is perfect.
Mhm,
Parents, you all doing the best you can. Coaches, we're doing the best we can. But just creating a space and asking how they're doing with no connection to what they're doing is what
mhm.
makes the biggest difference.
That was so powerful. I love what you said. I'm gonna just soundbite that. Creating a connection on how they're doing that's not connected to what they're doing, right? Because typically we those phone calls are of how you're doing is like, how's your grades?
Yeah.
Is that right? But no,
Mhm.
how are you, like you, the
Yeah.
core of you as a person,
Yeah.
and that being the culture
Mhm.
of our
Yes.
interaction with people. And then I'll just add in community. And you were touching on that with connection, but finding community
Yeah.
is really important, whether that be family, whether that be a parent group or family group, like Dr. Holmes talked about, a local community center, but community is very important. Don't isolate no matter what. It's really
Mhm.
easy to isolate. It's so easy to
Yeah.
just isolate and shut the world out. And I'm not saying be around people all the time. There are times when we need that alone time,
Absolutely. Yeah.
especially if you're going through depression or suicide ideation. Those are just types of mental health challenges where you want to be connected to someone.
Yeah. For
And
sure.
you don't want to be in isolation. So whether it's someone that you trust or whether it's someone that you love, we encourage you to reach out to them. And of
Absolutely.
course, therapy when you're ready to take that step.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely insightful and incredible, Dr. Holmes. I really enjoyed our conversation uh,
Likewise.
today. I learned so much from you. I just want to pick your brain after this. As I mentioned, my daughter is in middle school. She plays ball. Would love to hear more about your research and ways that I can support as well. And then I also appreciate all of you for listening, for tuning in today
Yes.
to our fireside chat. Again, share this out if you're watching this later on. If you're not watching it live, that's fine. We want to make sure that we're amplifying these positive messages. This is the month of mental health awareness, and I believe mental health is all of us, and we can do our part by sharing information, clicking on this link and sharing it out to someone that you know, so that they are also able to get the information, or just check on your children, check on those that are around you, check on yourself,
Yes.
right? Check
Yes.
on you. How are you doing? Check on you. We want you to be well.
Mhm.
We want you to be okay. So again, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for tuning in today to our fireside chat. Do us a favor and continue to subscribe and follow us for any updates on what's going on at iraiseinc.org, or on our social media platforms at iraiseorg. You can also follow me, Shaniqua Moore, CEO and founder, at Shaniqua E. Moore on all social media platforms. And last but not least, Dr. Holmes, how can people reach out to you and follow you?
Absolutely. So you can visit my website. It is my name. It's www.marleneholmes.com. You can also email me. My organization is called the BFCA Experience. So the email is BFCA, which stands for Black Female Collegiate Athlete. So the email is bfcateam@gmail.com. And then on Instagram, you can follow me at Dr. Marley _H. So DRMARLEY _H. And feel free to reach out either on any platform, to have conversations. I'm always available. If there's virtual needs, I do a lot of travel to come into different institutions and provide services there. So if there's a thought that you have and you're not sure how to navigate it, please don't hesitate to reach out.
So incredible. Please reach out to Dr. Holmes. She's an incredible resource, and I know I'll be reaching out after this. So, again, thank you so much, all. We will be back next week. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye.